Yes.
I'm very interested in your comments on this phrase, Western culture is committing suicide. Why is that happening?
Guilt.
Yes, what guilt? Expand please. Whose guilt? What guilt?
Well, there's lots for people to be guilty about. You know, I mean, you might say, to what degree should you bear the horrendous guilt of your ancestors? And that's a really hard question. I mean, because the radical left answer would be, to the degree that you're privileged by your ancestry, you should bear their guilt.
And what, commit suicide?
Well, yes. The question is, then what do you do? Well, what you should do is, what I suggested today, I would say, is take responsibility for your lives and understand that what you have came at a terrible cost and that you have an ethical obligation to use it properly. And that would be sufficient to pay for the sins of your ancestors, so to speak. I think it's absolutely reprehensible that the radical left dares to attribute to ethnically identified groups collective guilt. There's absolutely no excuse for that. It's completely murderous, and that should be rejected out of hand. So, but that's independent of the issue about what you should do, given that part of your wealth is a consequence of historical catastrophe. So you should try to sort that out, roughly speaking, and for everyone's benefit, but not necessarily because you're any more guilty personally. You're guilty as hell personally, but so is everyone else. That's the critical thing. So is everyone else. Okay, I would like to answer that question, but I can't. And there's two reasons for that. The one is that there's a large element of the answer that has to be legal, and I can't do that. And the other part of it is because I'm actually too tired to formulate a coherent response to that. So, and I don't want to formulate an incoherent response. So I'm sorry that I can't be, I mean, obviously I believe that people's right to communicate should be as untrammeled as possible. But to bridge the gap between that and your specific concern requires a feat of mental energy that I can't do at the moment, and maybe ever. At the back?
Hi there. Just one quick note before I get into my two questions I have. As a gay male, I want to say thank you for speaking the truth on the whole pronoun thing, because that drives me absolutely ballistic in today's society. Now, two quick questions. I want to get your view on the social construct of a safe space that universities like my own here at U Ottawa have tried to push on it.
Yeah.
And as well, I want to understand what your view on this whole white privilege thing is that universities like U Ottawa, U of T, Ryerson, Yale, all these other universities are trying to cram down.
Yeah, well, I think the idea of white privilege is absolutely reprehensible. And it's not because white people aren't privileged. You know, we have all sorts of privileges, and most people have privileges of all sorts, and you should be grateful for your privileges and work to deserve them, I would say. But the idea that you can target an ethnic group with a collective crime, regardless of the specific innocence or guilt of the constituent elements of that group, there is absolutely nothing that's more racist than that. It's absolutely abhorrent. I can't... I mean, if you really want to know more about that sort of thing, you should read about the kulaks in the Soviet Union in the 1920s, K-U-L-A-K-S, because they were farmers who were very productive. They were the most productive element of the agricultural strata in Russia. And they were virtually all killed or raped and robbed by the collectivists who insisted that because they showed signs of wealth, they were criminals and robbers. So, and one of the consequences of the prosecution of the kulaks was the death of 6 million Ukrainians from a famine in the 1930s. The idea of collectively held guilt at the level of the individual as a legal or philosophical principle is dangerous. It's precisely the sort of danger that people who are really looking for trouble would push. So, and just a cursory glance at 20th century history should teach anyone who wants to know exactly how unacceptable that is. With regards to your first, okay, there's the safe space issue, but you also said something right at the beginning. You announced your sexual preference at the beginning, and I understand exactly why you did that, but I have a comment about that. And this is something for people in the audience to think about. I've received at least 25 letters from transsexual people, and that's quite a few because there aren't that many transsexual people, right? So they're rare. They're very rare, and every single one of them but one was supportive. And the one that wasn't supportive was mildly critical. And they said exactly the same thing that you said, roughly speaking. And so one of the things we want to remember is that just because some noisy activists stand up and say, because I'm a member of this group, or even worse, because I say I'm a member of this group, I am therefore an advocate for that group's interests, we should just dispense with that self-identification as a worthy representative instantaneously, because it's predicated on the idea that one dimension of a person's identity is sufficiently, what would you say, broad and all-encompassing so that you can infer their political stance, for example, which you can't. And so the trans people that have written me, they all say the same thing. A, those people do not speak for me. B, we're not all the same. C, most of us think that the enforced pronoun issue is doing nothing but drawing negative attention to us. D, most of us just want to be referred to by the other pronoun. That's the whole point. So, so this has been very, very reassuring to me, because one of the things I presumed right from the onset was that there was no evidence whatsoever that this nonsensical legislation and the postmodern idiocy behind it is in fact demanded by this community, or that it will in any way be in anyone's best interest. No, I don't buy it. And I think it's rotten right to the core. So, and then the safe space issue. It's like, if you need a safe space, see a therapist. Really. Really, university is not a safe space. If university is done right, it is a radically unsafe space. If you want to go somewhere and get yourself taken apart intellectually, and then hopefully put back together, then you go to university. Everything you believe should be challenged in every possible way, but not in a destructive sense, right? Like when you're renovating a house, you don't just burn it to the ground and walk away. That's what the postmodernists do to adolescents, by the way. You dismantle it in consultation with its occupant, attempting to build something more beautiful and functional on the foundation. It's not a safe space. In my classes, and I tell my students this right at the beginning, I'm trying to get them to understand why they are Nazis. Right, there isn't anything more unsafe than that. And all of them, virtually all of them, write back to me afterwards and say, this was the most worthwhile class I've ever had in my life, and it changed my life. It's like, well, I'm teaching you the worst possible thing about yourself. And your response is, oh, that was so useful, and I'm way better than I was. But it's in keeping with the idea that you need to be exposed to things that you fear and hate, because that's where salvation lies, roughly speaking.